G'day and welcome to my channel. Another brewery series video. I think you're going to like this one. So we're back to Torquay, this time at Bells Beach Brewing. Torquay, the home of Bells Beach, where the world's best surfers compete in the mighty Rip Curl Pro. The birthplace of iconic brands Rip Curl and Quicksilver, and it's the official start point of the Great Ocean Road. Torquay is Victoria's surfing and beach worship capital on the lands of the Wadawurrung people. Torquay is also the home of Bells Beach Brewing, where thirst follows surf. And today we're going to brew the famous Raglan Haze, Hazy IPA. For this batch, I decided to use the Brewzilla 65 litre model. It's quite a large grain bill, nearly 7 kilo, and while it will fit in the Brewzilla 35 litre, it's going to be much easier in the 65. There's a few upsides and a few downsides when using the 65 litre for a single batch. The only real downside for a large grain bill is that your sparge amount is going to drop significantly. But the benefits are you have a much wider grain bed, that means it's not so thick, and relatively much more like a commercial setup, whereas in the 35 litre your mash pipe is tall and skinny, which of course makes it harder to get a nice even flow through the grain bed. For this batch I'm starting with 25 litres of water at 73 degrees Celsius. I'm aiming for a mash temp of about 68 degrees Celsius. Of course I add salts and lactic acid to the mash water. I won't give my amounts because yours is likely to be different, but I will put up on the screen what I was aiming for with my water profile. You can have a look at the amount of salts I used in my recipe. Of course, there will be a link in the description of this video, straight to the recipe. For the grain bill, we're close enough to 65% Gladfield ale malt, 20% wheat malt, and about 15% flaked oats. I'll leave a link below for some Gladfield ale malt substitutes. But really, any light ale malt or Pilsner malt will do the job. There's a lot of wheat and oats in this recipe, so using rice hulls is a great idea. 150 to 200 grams of rice hulls will make your day much easier. With all the oats and wheat in there, you want to make sure it's really mixed in. And don't be afraid to stir several times during the mash. If you are doing it in a smaller system and having issues with flow, it's absolutely fine to turn the pump off, put the lid on, and just let it sit there at temperature. Every now and then you can turn the pump on, pump some of the warm liquid from the bottom up to the top, just to help maintain the temperatures. I stirred this at least 3 times during the mash and had the pump on and off at certain times, depending on how the flow was going. As always, I start with a slow pump speed, and as the flow gets better, I can speed it up slightly during the mash. Keep an eye on your levels. You may spot a little cable tie I have hanging in there. That helps me keep an eye on how much the wort is backing up. 10 minutes into the mash, I took a pH reading to see how everything was going. And today, we were right where I wanted to be. All up, I let this mash for about 60 minutes, and then went into mash out. I set the mash out temp at 78 degrees, and because of all the oats and it's a thicker grain bed, I gave it 20 minutes. 10-minute ramp time, and 10 minutes at mash out temps. I know some people like to skip mash out, but with a high mash temp of 68, it's a really good idea to perform a mash out, and it really will help with the flow during the sparge. When mash out was complete, I pulled the basket, and then I sparged with 12 litres of water at 78 degrees Celsius. I let the mash bed completely drain out. I make sure the wort is mixed well, and I take a reading. I was at 1.055. Something I like to do for these very hoppy beers is just adjust the kettle pH. I use an old spreadsheet called Mash Made Easy. You just enter your pre-boil pH and volume in, and it lets you know how much acid to add to bring your target cooled post-boil kettle pH down to about 5.1 where I want it. I will do a full video on this in the near future. During the boil, your pH is likely to drop from 0.1 to 0.3 points, and for this beer you're aiming for the whirlpool to be about 4.9. So if I start at 5.1, I'm starting in a good position. I prefer to do it here because I'm usually busy around the whirlpool time. 10 minutes before the end of the boil, I add some yeast nutrient. This recipe is an old school NEPA, meaning it is about an 80°C whirlpool. Interestingly, this is the first recipe in the dozens I've looked at from breweries that has the 80° whirlpool, and it helps tame some of those New Zealand hops. Whenever you are trying to change the temperature of the wort post-boil, whether it be cooling down for the whirlpool or cooling down to pitch yeast, the Brewzilla display readings are often very wrong, since the probe is down the bottom and there's a lot of residual heat from the hot elements, and also depending how close the probe is to your cold wort returning from the chiller. So it's a good idea during this process to use a thermometer so you can get an accurate reading of what your wort is actually at. That's why here you can see the display is actually reading much lower than 80°, where the mass of the wort was only just at 80°. Once you're down to 80°, you add your whirlpool hops, and I'll whirlpool for 15 minutes. Then I turn the whirlpool off and let it stand for another 15 minutes. I then run it through my chiller into my fermenter. I then add the yeast. The yeast that was listed in the recipe was verdant, but I'm using the new Cellar Science Hazy strain, which is also derived from London 3, just like verdant is. I fermented this one at 19°C. I took a lot of readings during this ferment every day because I'd never used the yeast and I didn't have any pill or tilt device inside the fermenter. I wanted to track the ferment. I also did a forced ferment, again because I hadn't used this yeast, and all that meant was on the day one I took out a jar of the wort, I put it somewhere warm, gave it a shake every now and then just to hurry the ferment along in the jar, and I could determine where the yeast was going to stop. So every day I was measuring the jar and the fermenter. The jar was a little bit in front a day, but the yeast in the fermenter just about kept up. It ripped through. Due to my testing, I knew this was going to stop about 17. Once I saw the ferment starting to slow, it's a good time to let it free rise or bump your temperature up a couple of degrees to 21°C and keep it there until it's finished. And I was surprised, but I finished at the required 1.017. The forced ferment told me that was going to happen, and then it happened in the fermenter, and I was very happy about that. So I hit my numbers spot on. I left it for a good 3 days after the dry hop. I don't have a way of rousing my hops, so 3 to 4 days just to make sure I get the goodness out of those hops is a great thing. I then crash chilled it in the fermenter. This is a really important step for these very hoppy beers. You really need to give it a good crash chill and try and plan to leave some beer behind. You don't want to be draining it down to the bottom of the yeast cake, or you will pick up hop matter, and a lot of the time that's where your hop burn comes from. You do not want hop matter in your finished product. The top selling beer, the Raglan Haze. Beautiful, hazy beer, nice bitterness, and it's those New Zealand hops. It's such a great beer. You've got to be careful, it sneaks up on you. But all I will say is, summer's coming, it's the best time to go down to Torquay, although don't forget them in the winter. I try and visit all the time. It's when I went down and got the footage you saw. I visit Torquay all the time. It's the closest beach to me, and I mean by that I mean Ocean Beach. There's the bay over here, but the Ocean Beach is that way, and it's beautiful. It reminds me of home, where I came from, and I try and spend as much time down there as possible. So I want to send a big thank you out to Jono and Kev and the rest of the crew down there. Drop in when you can. When you do go to visit, just remember it's not in the major city, it's in the country or the beachside town, and so it might not be open on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but depending on the season, just double check. It's worth it. I always take the kids down to Torquay for a night in the caravan park, and always make sure you try and get there on that Thursday night, Friday night, so you can catch the breweries when they're open. So you can visit Torquay, a beautiful beachside town. You got the famous surfing Bells Beach next door. You got a trio, at least of breweries. They're opening all the time. I might be able to get one. There's two I've got now, Blackman's, Bells Beach. Maybe we can get the other one. Email them. I'm not sure if they're open yet. They should be open by now. Let's get one of mine. This is the one I brewed. As you can see, perfect. Just before we go any further, I do want to mention, because they're getting huge in the States, in the UK, New Zealand hops, of course, they've been pushing them there for a couple of years. This is a New Zealand hop beer, that's where the name comes from. It is brewed, of course, in Australia at Torquay at Bells Beach Brewing, but it utilises the great flavours you can get from New Zealand hops. I've seen a lot of recipes lately that people have made and they don't quite understand how to use them. This is one way to get the best out of the two probably most famous, Nelson Sav and Nectron. So if you've never visited Torquay before or Bells Beach Brewing, I suggest you should. There is a little trick that I use. Put this one in your back pocket. When you go to Torquay, everyone hears about the Rip Curl shops and the Gander shops and all these factory outlets. And there's cheap factory outlets. But all the big shops are on the main street. Everyone goes to them. If you go down the street to where Bells Beach Brewing is, that's where the actual discount shops are, the factory outlet shops are. So people get a little bit confused. They don't find them. If you turn down that street and the rest of your happy family goes shopping, you can just duck up to Bells Beach Brewing. Seriously, it's a 30-second walk from where the discount shops are, and say, oh, give us a call when you finish shopping. I'll be sitting here having a Raglan Haze, having a hamburger if the hamburger van's open. They're good chicken burgers. They're the ones I have. Visit. You should support independent breweries. We'll be in trouble without them. One of the really great things about Bells Beach Brewing is they always have one-offs and experimental beers on tap. So you've got their core range all the time. There's always a great selection of other beers. Every time I've been there, there's been a beer I haven't had before. More than one. 3 or 4 I haven't had before. And you don't find that in many breweries. So it's really worth a visit. Support independent local breweries. We need them. It's very, very important. Thanks to Jono, Kev, and the rest of the crew. Take it easy. I'll see you in the next one. Like, subscribe, share, brew this beer. If you like New Zealand hops, if you haven't tried New Zealand hops before, try it. It's a great beer. I'm going to brew it again. You have to know what you're doing with New Zealand hops. Kev's nailed it with this one. Cheers. And a reminder, without my Patreons, these videos couldn't continue. Thanks to my Patreon, please consider checking out my Patreon when you can, and make sure you get down to Bells Beach Brewing. Cheers. I'm gonna have another one. I'm gonna have another one.